The provost knows me pretty well, and I wasn't sure what this introduction was going to be like. It's going to be very gracious and very clean, Chris. Reverend Father President Jenkins, Provost Mazar, Dean Carlson, colleagues in the Platform Party, friends and family, and especially the 2020 graduates of the Graduate School at the University of Notre Dame. Greetings. To the class of 2020, welcome back to campus to celebrate your graduation. We are so very proud and grateful to you that you have chosen to come back after 2 years to celebrate your graduation with us today. I must also say that I'm loving this opportunity to address you. What a unique opportunity. I don't have to use the standard commencement script. You've already commenced. Since you've already made a lot of decisions and experienced many challenges and disappointments, instead of talking about a theoretical commencement, this is an opportunity to stand back and reflect together on the many happenings of the last 2 years as a model of what is to come. This is an interesting opportunity to take stock in the role that values play in your decisions and to prepare you for the 10 or so major transitions that you can expect to experience in your lifetime. Of any class, your commencing experience has been unique. Your plans to finish your graduate studies in spring of 2020 were likely disrupted when the campus closed and most of our operations were disrupted. I can only imagine the angst that you must have had not knowing when or how you would graduate. Your post-graduation plans were probably affected by the uncertainties facing employers in 2020. If and when you started the position, you started work in a remote work environment physically separated from your colleagues. Then a year or so later, you were undoubtedly affected by reopening, supply chain challenges, and the Great Resignation. When I put on my I love all things research hat, your experience is going to be a great case studies for the future. My avocation is leadership, particularly higher education leadership. It's pretty clear that managing transition is a significant part of higher education leadership, both for the leaders themselves as they navigate significant changes in their own professional life, but also in leading others who are experiencing transition. Imagine the department chair or dean that has to deal with faculty going through a mid-career crisis, or a faculty facing the transition of retirement. I'm not going to look over to my left here to see if anybody's smiling or groaning right now. Along with leadership characteristics such as authenticity, self-awareness, integrity, and inclusiveness, the understanding of transition is one of the primary challenges of leadership. There is significant literature about transitions that all point to how critical a successful and complete transition is. My own personal favorite is the book by William Bridges called Transitions, Making Sense of Life's Changes. Bridges' thesis is that the transitions in life, both personal and professional, are a three-part process: an ending, an uncomfortable middle, and a new beginning. Applied to graduation with a graduate degree, that three-part process implies an ending of your graduate program, an uncomfortable middle to your next calling, and then an enthusiastic beginning of your next life. So, how's that all worked out for the class of 2020? The ending of your graduate school days is generally not the hardest transition you'll make. First of all, it's voluntary, unlike involuntary transitions you might face, such as losing a job or the death of a loved one. And most of you, I think, are very, very, very happy to have reached the finish line. So that ending should be pretty easy. But not everybody completes this phase easily. Some people don't want to leave their graduate program. They seek another environment as similar to the graduate program as possible. Or they continue to operate like a graduate student in their new role and fail to launch. or they attempt to maintain their identity as a graduate student. A young assistant professor told me just a few days ago that he would prefer to still be a postdoc working in the lab. He isn't sure he wants the responsibilities of writing grants and advising students. So how did this go for you? As you think about your own experiences, did you have a successful ending? Or are you still in the process of ending? The uncomfortable middle is the part of the transition where I worry the most about graduate students. Many students I've observed at the end of their studies don't put enough energy or thought into the uncomfortable middle. The simultaneous demands of wrapping up classes, exams, and a thesis, on top of the time demands of doing a thorough job search, generally mean that the deep contemplation needed for discernment takes a back seat. My own graduate students were pretty wild-eyed and obsessive when they were in their last year. They were going to finish their thesis no matter what. In this crazy finishing mode, many were also trying to secure a job. I've observed students who took the first opportunity offered, others who chose to do what others wanted them to do, and still others who chose to do what they dreamed of when they started their graduate program rather than what they were prepared to do by the end of their graduate program. A quick and easy decision often manifests itself in an unhappy first job experience. When I graduated with my bachelor's degree, I was told that 90% of newly graduated engineers changed jobs within the first 4 years. I didn't believe that was possible. But from what I observed, that number was about right. The retention statistics for second jobs was much better. It seemed like second-time job seekers made better decisions. Maybe because of the pandemic, some of you had an involuntary gap year. I'd be interested to know how perceptions changed as you navigated the uncomfortable middle in that gap year. And for all the parents that worried about that gap year, or the seemingly unhurried approach of your student not finding a job after all those years in college, maybe this isn't a bad thing. I'd certainly be interested to hear. For some of you that took jobs after graduation, I wonder how you might think, how many of you might think you're still in the uncomfortable middle, realizing that the current job isn't right and you're on the trajectory that really doesn't fulfill you. If so, you're not alone. There are many stories, including my own, where people come to the realization that everything about this job is pretty much as advertised, and it's exactly what you thought you wanted, but it's not what you're called to do. In my case, thank goodness that I stepped back and took another path. I have another example of the uncomfortable middle that you'll all relate to, and this one includes parents and spouses. What are you going to do with all that extra money now that you have a salary and don't have to worry about tuition? I can only imagine how totally, truly uncomfortable you are trying to transition your budget. If you're having trouble with the uncomfortable middle on this front, the Notre Dame Development Office will be in touch to give you some choices. William Bridges and others counsel patience in this uncomfortable middle. Many of these major transitions are the opportunity to transform yourself personally and professionally in some dimension. That transformation will take time and discernment. You have to detach to reattach. The uncomfortable middle is one time in particular where I hope that your Notre Dame experience will make a difference. Decisions in this uncomfortable middle are life-changing and should be made based on values. I'll come back to the decision-making process and the uncomfortable middle a little bit later. Finally, the third leg of the transition process is the new beginning. The literature says, and my observations confirm, that if you're conscientious about your ending and the discernment in the uncomfortable middle, you will start the new phase of your life with enthusiasm and commitment. Very early in my career, I noticed that people who were still agonizing over whether they had made the right job decision tended to hedge on committing to a new role. Their success and their happiness in that new role didn't match those that were all in and committed. In sending off my own graduate students, I always advise them to make a commitment to the job for some predetermined period of time, then stick their head up and assess whether the path they were on was the right path. While no job is perfect under the microscope of daily scrutiny, it is lost energy to be anxiously assessing every activity. You miss the big picture when all you see are the trees and not the forest. Set a deadline, commit to the job. When you hit the deadline, stick your head up and make an assessment. If the job isn't right, start a new transition. If it is right, put your head down and take another lap. So back to the uncomfortable middle in Notre Dame. Whenever I've had the opportunity, I've asked about the life story of people I admire. People that are accomplished, fulfilled, and contented. Sort of that serene and self-confident person. I've yet to hear anyone say that things went anywhere close to their original plan. They all pretty much describe a sequence of transitions. Some of those transitions were involuntary. Some were enabled by a mentor. Some were opportunistic. Some were deliberately sought. Those transitions all add up to an unplanned and unimagined life story. All of these transitions involve decisions. Many were difficult, close calls. Option A and option B seemed pretty similar at the time. Others are hard decisions between apples and oranges. One value of salary versus another value of service. Those that have had these magical life stories always refer to these transitions as close calls or difficult decisions at the time, but reflect later how lucky or blessed they were that they had made the right decision. And they generally made a long sequence of right decisions. My observations of these highly successful and fulfilled people is that they didn't make this entire sequence of correct decisions by accident. They were consistently making value-based decisions. They chose to work for a company with clear values and a culture of inclusiveness and support. They chose to work with selfless people with clear values. They consistently chose the option that used their God-given talents or the option for which they were called. At Notre Dame, I know you've heard over and over that the university aspires to be a force for good. I hope you've heard over and over that our greatest mechanism for being a force for good is you, the students we send out into the world. And I hope you've heard over and over that you matter. That calling to be a force for good is a difference maker. In the various moments of discernment, if you remember that call, including the call to use your talents to serve, you'll have the North Star you need to make your own sequence of right decisions to live a fulfilled and well-lived life in service to those around you. By the fact that you have chosen to do graduate study, you've already demonstrated that you have the emotional intelligence to defer gratification for a greater good. By coming to Notre Dame, you've already been exposed to a values-based education. These values are a great start. With experience and maturity, you'll grow in the breadth and depth of your North Stars and values. Dr. Moniz said in the recent 2022 graduate school commencement ceremony that commencement speeches have a very short half-life. So I tried to find a short, pithy statement that you could take away from today that would capture what you should seek when you face major transitions. A reminder to you to live a value-based life where you will serve others, avoid the temptations of instant gratification, and to find and follow your calling. I believe that when your aspiration matches your calling, when your aspiration aligns with your calling, you will experience a state of happiness, satisfaction, pride, and well-being, regardless of how challenging that job might be. What would you call that? The best term I could come up with was joy. Joy seems like a good term for a combination of happiness, satisfaction, pride, and well-being. So the catchphrase I offer you today is, seek joy. The path to joy is not the easiest path. It is not the path of continuous happiness or the path that might bring you the most fame. But I definitely also believe that if you are truly self-aware, the path of joy to joy will also not be the hardest path, because you will be doing what you know how to do and what you are called to do. In the 10 or so major transitions you will face in your life, I urge you to remember the 3-step process of transition. Remember to be patient and deliberate, particularly with the uncomfortable middle. And when you are looking for a North Star to help you make the right decision among various potentially good options, seek joy. Let me close by asking that you keep in your prayers Dean Carlson as she transitions to her new role as provost at the University of Delaware, Provost Mazar as she transitions back to her role as senior associate provost in July, Provost-elect John McGreevy as he transitions the role of provost at Notre Dame in July, and for me as I consider my transition out of the role of vice president for research at Notre Dame and enter my own uncomfortable middle. May God bless you, and remember, seek joy.